So many dragons, will we be running into them everywhere beyond the theocracy's influence? Ludmilla and Ilishnish departed the huge Beastman city by the lake, heading off to see how far the country extended to the south. After an hour of flying over misty jungle carpeting low mountains carved into countless ravines and valleys, the skies cleared and the landscape below started to turn arid. Ludmilla found what she could only describe as an ocean of sand, barren plateaus and maze-like stretches of badlands. Ilishnish noted that it was the domain of many blue dragons, so they avoided crossing over the dry mountain ranges and made their way along the Orakalon Basin's southern border. Along the way back west, the frost dragon swerved around the domains of several brass dragons. She claimed that they were the most annoying dragons in existence and that being caught by one was to be avoided at all costs. After that, she pointed out that the row of fiery mountain peaks further south was Red Dragon territory. Red dragons are the dragons all those human tales use as a model, by the way, Ilishnish said. So they're evil, covetous, prideful, foul-tempered and belligerent? They're also one of the largest and most powerful of dragon species, and they breathe fire. Plus they have a taste for the flesh of young maidens. Also, while they're usually cast as brutes in mortal legend, which isn't wrong, they're highly intelligent brutes. I can't figure out how some of that ties into the rest, Ludmilla said. Their preference for the flesh of young maidens, for instance. How in the world did they end up with that? Is it only human maidens, or those of any race? I don't think it's humans in particular, Ilishnish said. Human princesses, noble women, innocent virgins and what have you appear in the stories you've heard and read because humans just like hearing about themselves. They want to relate, empathize and otherwise vicariously live through characters featured in the narrative. It's pretty silly if you ask me. Silly. The lore of the world is so rich and varied, yet humans tend to only be interested if it matters to them. Singing about Keeliarel the Koalinth and his adventures in the Yolorek Sea drums up little to no patronage. If you turn all the characters into humans, change the Yolorek Sea into the Yolorek Empire, add some human-style romance and so on, suddenly it becomes worth listening to. This tendency is also one of the things that makes humans dangerous. Ludmilla frowned at the sudden turn. I'm not sure how it went from silly to dangerous. It goes back to what we spoke of before. Humans divide the world into what matters, and what doesn't. More importantly, they divide the world into us and them. Stories from other cultures and races are not simply entertainment, they offer insight into what the world beyond one's direct experiences is like. But humans reject the opportunity to gain those insights because of the aforementioned tendency. It reinforces the way that humans and human society divide the world, amplifying biases, stereotypes and hatred. The only tidbits that tend to stick are those that can be taken as information about potential threats, which falls into what matters to humans. Ilishnish's observation seemed unerringly correct. All of the lore that she had heard or read revolved around humans and delivered things from a human perspective. Any tales that didn't have humans in them at all focused on singular events that conveyed information about possible dangers. As for why red dragons have a taste for the flesh of young maidens, Ilishnish said, efficient population control? If one eliminates nubile young females, it cripples a race's ability to multiply. So you would be seen as a particularly large and delicious food item? Ludmilla smiled as the frost dragon's wing beats picked up and she gained altitude. If they're everything that you say they are, Ludmilla said, we may need to fight them one day. What? Why? You're as averse to fire as I am, plus you're a young maiden yourself. You're stuck as one, too, I'll at least grow to a venerable age. We'll have to see what their region looks like, first. If they threaten our expanding trade network, the Sorceress Kingdom will have to do something about it. Then they should send someone immune to fire after them, Ilishnish told her. They're making us work like crazy as it is. You're not at all interested in their hordes? Of course I am, but that doesn't make me interested in being set on fire. Plus, they put their stuff in the most uncomfortable of places. A crosswind buffeted Ludmilla in her saddle as they made their way closer to the Draconic Kingdom border. Ludmilla's gaze went from north to south, and she frowned at the stark difference in weather on either side. Can you explain this weather to me? Ludmilla asked. This doesn't match how it works at home at all. It actually does, Ilishnish answered. Your problem is that you only have a very small part of the bigger picture. Weather systems are huge, involved things. What drives the wind in Warden's Vale is this very same belt of desert here. That was a desert? Yes? I've read and heard about them before, but I still had no concrete idea of what they were. Well, now you do. Anyway, these hot, dry regions send air upward, and that sucks in the air around it, creating wind. Cyclonic currents are generated, and those currents carry moisture that delivers rain or snow, depending on the conditions of the area that the current is traveling over. In the case of the jungles between the desert to the south and the mountains to the north, they also generate their own rain that contributes to the cycle. Ludmilla looked over her shoulder at the no longer visible desert. She couldn't see anything that resembled what Elishnish had described. Not that she expected to. It's weird how you somehow just know all that. No, it's not, Elishnish scoffed. Frost dragons are masters of the weather. One day, I'll be powerful enough to innately control it. Don't you already do that in your domain? Governing a domain and controlling the weather are two different things. Any dragon can govern a domain suitably sized to their strength. Since we're on the topic, how does the presence of a draconic domain affect the environment in general? It's more that draconic domains enhance the already present environment. It's not as if the desert back there formed because blue dragons moved in, it was already there. Similarly, the jungle we crossed didn't need green dragons to grow. I suppose the best way to put it is that we are an existence that reinforces or enriches the environments specific to each species of dragon. So you enriched your domain by making the mountain more mountainy? It's something that takes a while, Elishnish said. In my case, it will eventually increase the diversity and competitiveness of life wherever my domain reaches. Elemental energies are also involved, which you'd visibly note as the abundance of ice, water and its moderating influence on the weather nearby. The Chronos mentioned something about abnormally hot and dry weather last year, so I naturally acted to compensate for it. Miss Gran also suggests that some magical things might happen. What you're doing already seems magical enough. Well, there's magic, and then there's magic. In this case, I'm referring to the primal energies of the world rather than tier magic. You're doing the same thing if you didn't notice. You mean with negative energy? Yes. Negative energy and positive energy are among the primal energies that govern the growth and development of our world. In draconic terms, Warden's Vale is your domain. I can't sense it as a draconic domain, though, so you're obviously not a dragon. I think I already knew that I wasn't a dragon. What does that mean for the Draconic Kingdom? Queen Auricula's domain is tangible to you, but I have no idea what effect she has on it. Well, you mentioned that she is the descendant of a human union, so probably something along those lines. Her domain appears to be the perfect environment for humans, so she likely has a hand in that. She wondered if the Queen would humor her with an explanation if she brought up the topic. The Draconic Kingdom still had many inexplicable mysteries. Queen Auricula might not be aware of what was going on at all, but what Ludmilla knew of her strongly suggested that it wasn't the case. Let's drop closer to these mountains, Ludmilla told Elishnish. There aren't any draconic domains here, are there? There is. Really? What is it this time? The black-scaled dragon lord? Oh. Elishnish shed altitude, dropping to under 1,000 meters over the rugged mountain ranges of the Draconic Kingdom's southern provinces. Ludmilla leaned forward with interest, noting the countless trails and roads connecting the hundreds of settlements nestled in the valleys. There's a lot more here than I imagined, she said. The people I questioned about this area made it sound like a desolate wasteland. Compared to their riverlands, it is, but it's only a degree less verdant from Warden's Vale when I first arrived there. We're at the tail end of their dry season, so it should be close to how your home is in early autumn. Are you looking for anything in particular? I wanted to see what the situation of the humans here was like, but I barely see any activity at all. It is nighttime. As for the situation, there are plenty of beastman tribes out here. The human settlements are built on or near sources of water, and the beastmen have moved in. What type of beastmen are there? Con and Irma. There's plenty of activity from the Con. Do you see anything like a company on the prowl? We don't have any information about the behavior of their warrior tribes. I'll let you know if I see anything like a demi-human warband. Which way am I flying? Southwest. There's a port city by the name of Fortune Bay out there somewhere. The grey of dawn started to seep up into the eastern horizon by the time they found the southernmost city of the Draconic Kingdom. Fortune Bay lay at the end of a long bay where a river joined the sea. The valley along the river was developed into agricultural land and a paved highway stretched northwest, following the river along its course. A small fleet of ships was anchored offshore, too distant for any attempts by beastmen to sink them. "It looks like the city is still under human control," Elishnish said. "Beastman camps are lining the valley a kilometer upriver." "Focus on the humans for now," Ludmilla told her. "How active is the city? What's the condition of the citizens and the defenses?" Elishnish banked into a lazy circle over Fortune Bay. Ludmilla could make out the general features below and even the humans dotting the walls and streets, but it wasn't anything close to what a dragon's keen senses would discern. "It doesn't look like there's anything wrong with the city. People are waking up and coming out to do their morning routines. The sentries on the wall are well equipped and alert. Let's see, there are posters all over the city offering bounties for beastman heads. Also some notices about public health and sanitation." Fortune Bay appeared to be holding out spectacularly well. Ludmilla scanned the buildings, trying to figure out why that was. "Do you see their adventurer guild? It's at the northwest corner of their central plaza. Some adventurers were chatting outside of it." "Ranks? Give me a moment for a better angle." "All silver and above. The highest in that bunch was platinum. I believe they're planning a morning raid." "That's different. The Draconic Kingdom has been on the defensive everywhere else. I wonder what their secret is." Due to the geography of the bay, the beastmen probably couldn't intercept shipping effectively, which would explain the city's decent supply situation. It didn't answer where they were getting their supplies from or why they hadn't sailed around to Orichalon, but she doubted that Queen Auriculus would voice any complaints. However, if humans were successfully resisting the beastmen in the south, then the royal army's plans would have to change accordingly. The undead sweeping in and mysteriously only attacking the beastmen in the chaos would be a dead giveaway as to what was really going on. "I'll have to report this to the Queen and see what she has to say about this," Ludmilla said. "Let's finish up our look at the south. We'll head to Blighthold after that." They followed the highway leading northwest out of the city. Ludmilla silently tallied the number of beastmen camps in the valley. The fortress at the top of the pass to the Orichalon reach looked unoccupied, so she had Elishnish turn westward over the mountains again. "The humans are coming out of their hiding places," Elishnish noted. "It looks like they've been using all the caves out here." "I raid. Where?" Elishnish dipped lower, banking to follow one of the upper valleys. She slowed down as they passed over a small village with a mineshaft nearby. A half-dozen con lay felled by arrows on the perimeter, yowling in pain. Several humans moved behind the rocks and bushes 100 meters away. Ludmilla examined how the beastmen responded to the ambush. "The beastmen are going to lose a mystic." "Huh? How do you know that?" "Watch." A few moments later, some beastmen came up to the casualties along the perimeter. One sporting the accessories of a mystic ran up to a young con, kneeling to administer treatment. It sprouted 8 arrows a moment later and collapsed atop its patient. The beastmen accompanying the mystic tried to drag it to safety, but fell to more arrows along the way. More human raiders appeared, sending volleys into the village. The con went to the buildings for cover, but not before dozens more were slain by the torrent of arrows. Panic and confusion rose as they shouted to one another, trying to make sense of what was going on. "It seems that they don't respond well to being ambushed. That's a general rule amongst ambush predators. We don't like getting stalked or ambushed." Combined with their singular mindset, it created a deadly weakness for the con. They were frozen where they were, trying to figure out what to do to little avail. The few who went berserk and charged the ambush lines were focused upon by the human archers. Assailed from all sides, the beastmen who remained outside gradually succumbed to their attackers. Once the village lanes were cleared, the human raiders moved in and set the buildings aflame one at a time. The con who jumped out were subsequently slaughtered. "Now that's terrifying. Anyone that goes around lighting people on fire can't be a good person." "Clear." A deep voice carried across the village, "Withdrawing, now." The raiders ceased their frenzied bout of looting and filed out of the village. More humans emerged from the mineshaft, carrying nondescript sacks over their shoulders. Humans raiding a human village to kill beastmen and take off with their own resources. They were well practiced at it, too. The southern provinces weren't subjugated, they remained hotly contested. "Should I follow them?" Ludmilla eyed the columns of smoke rising from the village. Stay over the village. I want to see how the beastmen respond. They're pretty dead, if you ask me. There are other tribes in the vicinity. It can't be so one-sided or there'd be no beastmen left. The predicted response came 30 minutes later. A dozen con came running up the valley, led by a particularly large lord. They spread out to check for survivors. A few minutes passed before they gathered around the lord, shaking their heads. Find their trail, the lord said. These fires just went up. Those humans are so dead. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Wait, how strong does that big one look to you? Respectably strong, I guess? About entry-level adamantite, by our adventurer guild standards. Ludmilla lifted her right hand, palm up in front of herself. She sensed that the con lord was weaker than her, so she assumed he was somewhere in Mithril. In that case, how strong do I look to you? How should I know? You have that ring of non-detection on. Sorry. How about now? A bit stronger than that guy. She put on her ring again. When did that happen? Her work in the Empire did have its challenges, but she didn't think she had become that strong as a result. Using a bar of steel to test her strength was apparently no longer enough. She needed new measures to track her growth. Maybe she was close enough to the Death Series servitors to notice a tangible shift whenever she leveled. We got it, a voice said from below. Lead the way. I want these monkeys dealt with before they hit another one of our tribes. The con ran off in the direction that the human raiders had retreated. Elishnish silently glided after them. Is this how dragons always see things? Pretty much. I used to watch the tribes in the Azalesian mountains raid one another all the time. Did you ever intervene in those raids? Once. The target had something nice and I wanted it for myself. But when I got home, my father took it away. I wonder how many Frost Dragon raids were averted by your father showing you that you wouldn't be able to keep any valuables. That's an interesting way to look at it. The area around the Azalezia Mountains would be a very different place if he hadn't done that. Their quarry closed with their quarry in short order, making no attempt at staying concealed. The human raiders noticed their rapid ascent up the mountainside from half a kilometer away. Black flecks flew down at the con pursuers as they closed the distance. Futile. The con lord swatted an arrow out of the air. I'm going to strangle you with your bows. The human raiders transited a narrow defile. Rather than charge through after them, the con lord seemed to grow cautious at its entrance. The distance between the lord and his quarry grew as he sniffed the path in front of him. Looks like he's been caught by the raiders' traps before. Ludmilla called her glaive to hand and rested it over her lap. She produced a vial of gigant basilisk venom and applied it to the blade. After putting the vial away, she gripped her weapon and checked the progress of the pursuit below. The con lord had chosen an alternate path, going around the southern face of the mountain. Ludmilla snorted as he set off a trap anyway. Can you drop me over that con lord? Drop you? Like the Imperial Dragoons. You were watching them in the blister, right? I was, but, Gem, give me a moment to figure this out. If I go like this, then do this, alright. Dropping you. Huh? The world turned upside down as Elishnish banked into a vertical dive. Yellow sandstone and alpine brush filled her field of view. Alright, we're falling in his direction now. Let go of the saddle. Ludmilla loosened her legs. Elishnish slowed her descent and leveled out, leaving Ludmilla to plummet towards her target. She activated her hairpin, using its flight effect to correct her course toward the charging con lord, who had resumed his pursuit. Panicked human cries rose as arrows bounced off of the rocks around him. The few that did find their mark bounced harmlessly off of his hide. The con lord pounced with a roar. The roar was followed by a loud crack as Ludmilla's glaive pierced him squarely in the back and punched into the stone. The sound of unsettled pebbles bouncing down the slope was the only thing that accompanied her as she straightened from her kneeling posture. Human and con alike stared at her in shock. She produced her shortbow and loosed an arrow into the closest beastman's face. 2 more arrows found their marks before the remaining beastmen fled. She got 2 more before they disappeared around a nearby crag. Elishnish, can you take care of those runners? Sure. Ludmilla put a smile on her face and turned around, looking up at the human raiders. Good morning, she said. A piercing roar echoed over the mountain, followed by shrieks of undistilled terror. I'd like to speak with your company's captain, Hello? One of the men in front of her blinked. He looked around before calling out to a man further up the slope. He was half a head taller than she was, with a trimmed black beard and brown eyes. His weathered, but still handsome face suggested a man of middle age, which was rare in the Draconic kingdom. "You're the captain of this company?" Ludmilla asked. In a manner of speaking, he said with the deep voice that had been issuing orders from before. "General Saul Kanyan, the commander of Fortune Pass." "And you?" Ludmilla raised her hand to her breastplate in salute. "Captain Ludmilla Zaradnik, of the forces of the Sorceress Kingdom in the Draconic Kingdom. I saw that Fortune Pass was abandoned, so it was a surprise to see you alive." "Oh, we're still kicking. Since you secured this fellow here, I assume you're on the side of the Draconic Kingdom?" "Yes, Your Excellency." She produced her royal writ, holding it out to General Saul Kanyan. "I was reconnoitering the southern provinces when we came across your aid. Queen Auricula's will be pleased to learn of your survival." She reached out and grasped her glaive, then gave it a wiggle. An anguished howl exploded from the beastman pinned to the mountain. The general and his men leapt away in fright. "Might I know the name of the lord that I landed on?" Ludmilla asked. "The worms take you, bitch." The conlord shuddered as he struggled to free himself. More blood ran over the stones as he did so. Ludmilla reached out and snapped a set of necklace chains wrapped around his neck. "Adventurer plates?" She frowned. "The beastmen collect them as trophies," General Saul Kanyan told her. "They're personal trophies, so you took down some big game." She picked out an adamantite tag, flipping it around to read the inscription on the back. "Cerebrate Fierce Flash Crystal Tear, Oraculon, Paladin." Voices of dismay fell from the men gathered around them. Ludmilla searched for more adamantite tags in the collection, but there were none. "I never liked the man, but, is Her Majesty well?" General Saul Kanyan asked. "This beastman offensive wasn't like any other we've experienced in the past." "If you call being trapped under a mountain of royal duties well, then yes," Ludmilla smiled slightly. "She's somewhere between Blighthold and Orsport holding court at the moment." The previously dismayed voices rose in elation. General Saul Kanyan nodded and let out a sigh of relief. "I assume that since you're here, something's about to happen." "We've cleared the Draconic Kingdom up to about Rivergarden," Ludmilla said. "Her Majesty asked us to take care of the southern provinces before pushing the beastmen out of the Oraculon reach." "Up to about Rivergarden?" The general frowned. "How far did those beastmen get?" "They made it all the way to the coast and up to the Dead March," Ludmilla replied. "Oraculon was breached when we arrived." "What the hell? Where was the theocracy? Did they fall asleep?" "That's one of the more popular questions these days, Your Excellency. Anyway, I should deliver my report to Her Majesty. We're going to need to adjust our strategy now that we know what's going on here." The general's demeanor instantly shifted. His gaze grew sharp as he crossed his arms. "What did you have in mind coming in? Waiting for the rainy season to hit and picking off the beastmen while they were paralyzed by the deluge?" General Saul Kanyan looked up to the brightening morning skies. "If your forces can drop down on the beastmen just like you did, that should still work." "There are other considerations," Ludmilla said. "We were instructed to liberate the south because Her Majesty thought everyone here was at the mercy of the beastmen. How many more like this fellow are there out here? He's the head of the Cougar beastman forces in the whole of the southern provinces. There are a few more strong ones, but none like him. The lion beastmen have forces here, too, but the Cougars are the far greater threat in this terrain." "How would our intervention affect your operations?" The general gestured to the pinned conlord. "We were doing our damnedest to avoid this guy for months, so we'll be able to act more freely now. You may have just won the war for us here. Does that mean you have more companies at your disposal?" "More than just companies. We have hundreds of thousands of men and women playing cat and mouse all over the place." Ludmilla reached into her infinite haversack, producing dozens of healing potions. "In that case, don't do anything too risky for now. I'll consult with Her Majesty to see how she wants to proceed with the counter-offensive." "How long until you can get back to us?" 2 days, at most. Just so you know in advance, my recommendation to Her Majesty will be to advance up the Oraculon Reach. The Beastmen's headquarters appears to be at Corin on the lake, so they may shift forces away from the southern provinces once we make our push." "That would be nice," the general nodded. Let Her Majesty know that I tentatively agree with that notion. I can't imagine what the people under the Beastman occupation are going through right now. Thank you for your timely assistance, Captain Zaradnik. General Saul Karnian turned his attention back to his company. Ludmilla turned hers to the still squirming Beastman Lord on the rocks. She emptied a healing potion onto him, watching his grievous wound attempt to close around her glaive. Her hand went out and gave it another wiggle, and the Beastman howled in anguish again. Now, she said, whatever shall I do with you? Second day, Middle Wind Month, 1 CE. I can see why the civilian clans fled, now. I've never seen so many undead in my life. None of us have, Elin Renether. Thank you for preparing the appropriate response. One would be a fool to dismiss a warning from Narkira, Elin Renether replied. And those fools in the north cost us one of our finest with their empty pride. Thurgak sighed and stared down at the blanket over her lap. Before reaching the clan hold of Nartoraka, she had hoped against all hope that Goro had somehow survived. It was impossible to imagine that a warrior so powerful could fall to the undead. We sent our scouts out after destroying the 2 advances against our vanguard in the west, Elin Renether said. It's strange, are you sure that was all? She looked back up at the Narlord. What do you mean? The undead that we battled were numerous, but Goro should have been able to destroy them all on his own. There's no way he could have. Tell me what you fought. Our strongest opponents were abominations of flesh that towered over even myself. They were respectable foes to be sure, but nothing our warbands couldn't handle. Those are blood meat hulks, Thurgak said, but they were far from the strongest we encountered in the north. What did it mean? Thus far, the undead had advanced as an inexorable wave that consumed everything in its path. If they had reached the river, their most powerful forces shouldn't have been far behind. Unless... Do you have scouts watching out for flanking maneuvers? She asked. When we fought them in the north, their strongest forces came from behind while we were distracted by the thousands of weaklings in the front. Do undead use such tactics? Elin Renether scratched his ear. Honestly, this is beyond nearly all of us. Everyone knew that the undead were enemies of all life, but they were next to unheard of in a place that was full of life. As far as she knew, the jungles of Rolen Gork hadn't seen so much as a skeleton for generations. Even if she knew what they were all called, it would mean nothing to her fellow beastmen. The only reason why Thurgak knew anything about them was because Goro had briefed the Kiera warband working for Irmakisha upon discovering the Katza Plains. The ones you have to watch out for look a bit like humans, Thurgak said. Their equipment makes them stand out. Fighting them was futile, all anyone could do when they spotted one was run. How many were there? How strong? Thurgak shook her head. The flight back across the Draconic Kingdom was completely chaotic. There was no semblance of reconnaissance or holding actions conducted by the fleeing civilian tribes, and she only saw bits and pieces of the advancing horde. All I can say is that I saw at least a dozen of the warrior types in one place near the start of everything. On top of that, there are elder liches. They fly around like human mages, attacking those below with spells like Fireball. As for how strong they are, I'm fairly certain that they are each at least as strong as Goro was in his prime. I'll have our hunters keep an eye out for them, Elin Renether said. They may simply be spread out and we haven't seen them yet. This front that's developed is well over 100 kilometers across. Trying to find a dozen specific undead is next to impossible without them drawing attention to themselves. Oh, on that note, we've identified some weaknesses in the undead forces. What sort of weaknesses? The clan lord settled down beside Thurgak's litter. She shifted to face him properly. Hopefully, the weaknesses weren't the same ones that Irmakisha thought they could exploit in the north. They mostly revolve around tactical awareness, he said. We've been testing them with skirmishes all along the front, and they're, I suppose, slow is the best way to put it. The undead don't move very quickly, Thurgak told him, but they don't need to rest. The distance that they can cover in a day is more than what's possible for the average Nara Irma. The Irmakisha refugees fleeing the undead had realized that too late. Even civilian field beastmen could sprint at 80 kilometers per hour, so seeing the undead shuffle along at little more than 2 kilometers per hour had lent a false sense of security. The problem was that they couldn't sprint for long, and the long-distance endurance of Nara Irma was poor relative to even humans. Irmakisha's remnants had been overrun at a painfully slow pace over the course of a few days, and they were only the first of many to fall. It was then that Thurgak began to truly understand the evil of the undead. They were death made manifest, the creeping doom that eventually came to all living things. The refugees struggled for every minute of life as one might fight to keep death at bay, but that only seemed to make things worse. Bravery slowly turned into desperation, hope into despair. And, in the end, death still had its due. Thurgak blinked and shook her head. I'm sorry, what were you saying? If you're still tired. No, it's fine, I'm listening now. After delivering her warning to Natorika, she rested for several days. Physically, she was fine, but I said that their physical agility is only one element of them being slow, Elin Renatha told her. The other elements concern their tactical response times and battlefield awareness. We're starting to conduct small skirmishes based on our initial findings and the results look promising. A warband can destroy a group of undead and withdraw before reinforcements arrive. Packs of hunters can strike and fade with next to no risk. I think we saw something similar in Urmakasha's battle, Thurgak replied. They used that tactic to draw us in. Once we were deep enough, that was when they hit us with those stronger forces I described. Many of our lords already pointed out that risk, Elin Renatha said. Worry not, the warrior clans won't commit the same errors as the migrants in the west. Errors are not what you should be worrying about, Elin Renatha. The undead are far more capable than they appear. No, that's not it. Everything they do is purposeful. What you perceive as weakness might be exploitable to a degree, but the undead are simply too different from us to judge by our standards. To frame them as us is foolish. Elin Renatha stroked his bearded jowls as he listened to her, then stayed silent for a time. At the end of that silence, he sighed. Kalilendratha would have probably understood your meaning better, the clan lord said. He saw an entirely different world from the rest of us. What about Sage Khhschlr? Maybe we could speak with her. It's just not the same without Kalilendratha. Sage Khhschlr is the greatest affected by his loss. She's been holding everything together since then, but a sage is no war master. It's up to us warriors to answer this threat. Except none of us is a war master. The fact of the matter was that no one could match Kalilendratha. Not in scope, depth, or sheer strategic and tactical skill. No one saw the things that he did, nor could they think like him. Their war master could not be imitated or made up for. He was the shining hope of the West, the leader who would bring Roland Gork out of the darkness, and the humans had brazenly snuffed out that hope to the detriment of all. Elder liches are usually the first sign of a powerful assault, Thurgak said. They fly above the range of hunters' slings when moving from place to place. At night, that's beyond the range of our dark vision. Large concentrations of people are hit by fireballs. There are always wraiths that accompany them and they'll attack people that are on their own or in small groups. And these wraiths, do they fly, as well? They do. So you're saying that they could fly anywhere and attack us, and we won't know about it until we get attacked? And unless we just happen to have people at the place that they're attacking, Thurgak nodded, we won't be able to fight them. They'll be long gone before you hear about it. Even being aware of their tactics, she couldn't think of anything to do about them. With sufficient altitude, they were effectively undetectable at night. Their victims wouldn't know they were being targeted right up until the moment that spells started flying. If defense isn't feasible, Elin Renatha said, then we need to ensure that their assets are tied up. Have any counteroffensives been attempted? None that I know of, Thurgak replied. When the undead attack, all people can think of is getting away. Anyone that stands their ground is overwhelmed. Have you fought any of these elder liches or wraiths personally? The elder liches always stay out of reach, but I've been able to defeat wraiths. They appear as spirits in the form of beastmen, but, unlike elemental spirits, they can't be touched by normal attacks. I used martial arts that imbued my attacks with magical properties to hurt them. Doesn't that mean the civilians are completely powerless against wraiths? Mundane tooth and claw are harmless to them, yes. Elin Renatha blew out a sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. We're going to have to go through our warriors and see who can and can't hurt them, he muttered. How many wraiths do the undead forces have? I don't know, Thurgak replied. I only know that they're always around when the elder liches attack. Also, when they land strikes, it weakens the victim indefinitely. I had to run half the distance from the north under such an effect. Mystics can use lesser restoration to cure it. The mystics of the fleeing clans didn't have the mana to cure her, as all of their mana went into summoning food to stave off starvation. Not that it prevented most of them from being taken by the undead. It was only after she delivered her warning to Natorika that she found someone to remove the effect of the Wraith's vitality drain. How often do they do it? Elin Renethar asked. It happens any time they touch you with their attacks. As a fire elemental always burns their target if they hit them, a wraith always drains them. They aren't the only undead that do it. There are wretched-looking things called wights that weaken their targets if they successfully damage them. Ghouls and ghasts have a putrid stench that can sicken anyone that breathes it in, and they both also deliver disease with their bites. Those who die of the disease become ghouls and ghasts themselves. People who die to wights also turn into wights. Elin Renethar's disgusted snarl grew with every word. His striped tail lashed over the floor and his facial features twitched. I've never heard of anything like this. Our warbands don't have enough mystics to cure a constant stream of disease, decay and draining attacks. This is the opponent that we face, Thurgak replied grimly. They are death, given form, and the death that they cause leads to more death. We know that the undead are enemies of all life, but one truly doesn't understand until one experiences what they're like directly. Everything about them is everything that the living consider unclean, sickened, corrupted and decayed. We're going to have to revise our tactics for this, Elin Renethar said. Minimize contact if possible. Rely on hunters to chip away at their numbers. Save mana for disease and drains. It's going to be a difficult offensive if we can't employ our greatest strengths. I can't think of any better solution. I've heard that the Irma who dwell in the arid south have more experience with the undead, so you may want to see if they have any answers. Urmakisha had limited knowledge about the undead, but that was more than the tribes of the other races. This also suggested that the warrior clans in the south would have more. It was possible that they had a more elegant solution to the problem. I'll go and do that, Elin Renethar said. Please take more time to rest. I can't even begin to imagine what you've been through. When you feel well enough again, come over to the clan hold. Your experience will be invaluable. Oh, and let the warrior on duty know if you're hungry. I will, Thurgak replied. Elin Renethar rose to his feet again and nodded once before leaving her room. After the door quietly clicked shut, Thurgak let out an even quieter sigh. Would she ever feel well enough again? Even after finding safety in Natorika's city, her long nightmare continued to haunt her. In the central hall of the human clan hold conquered by Natorika, Elin Renethar approached Sage Khhschlr to deliver his findings about the undead. The sage's tail waved back and forth idly as she flipped through the pages of a human book. So, Khhschlr didn't look up from the book. How did your meeting with our guest go? There's something wrong with her, Elin Renethar replied. Oh my, is she sick? I don't think there's anything wrong with our food. That's not what I meant. She's not all there. It's like a part of her is focused on something else. Whatever it is, it's sucking all of the energy out of her. The girl is so young, yet she acts like a tired old crone. Then don't let a tired old crone get to you, the sage told him. Focus on the problem at hand. Did you learn anything useful? We'll have to put her claims to the test, but, if everything is true, we're going to need to make some big changes to our warbands. Test away, Khhschlr told him. The sooner we deal with this, the sooner we can get back to what we should be doing. He shook his head at her callous attitude. Khhschlr was born to a warrior clan and was Kalilindratha's favorite, but she had no respect for a warrior's troubles. In that sense, she was less one of them and more a member of the civilian clans. Thurgak mentioned that the undead we destroyed aren't the strongest of them, Elin Renethar said. There are reportedly dozens at least as strong as Goronak era. Preposterous, Khhschlr scoffed. This isn't the Yorgulan front with dragons lurking everywhere. A powerful undead being isn't so common as that. I suppose she spoke of elder liches? That was one type she mentioned by name. There were others. Elder liches are not difficult to deal with. You alone could probably kill 2 or 3 at once. Was that true? She sounded utterly assured of her assessment. Even if that were the case, Elin Renethar pressed on, the tactics that Thurgak described are extremely problematic. We need to make sure we can defeat anything that comes our way. You don't believe we have more than enough? I do not. If each of their champions was as strong as Goro Nakira, our combined warbands might be able to defeat a dozen in a pitched battle. The clans have deferred to you in matters of administration and economic management, but war is the purview of the warrior clans. We cannot take heedless risks with our forces. This is no mere aid. Our territory will be permanently lost to the enemy if we fail. The book snapped shut and the sage raised her gaze to meet his. And if Thurgak told you that 10 ancient dragons were coming this way, what would you do then? Then we would die. That's not something one can escape on such short notice. Why is she doing this now? Is there some point to it? It was no time for personal pride or quibbles over authority. They had a war to fight. We will do what we can with the information that we have, Elin Renatha said. But I advise that we at least gather our strongest warbands to deal with this threat. That would mean pulling the Lords dealing with the humans in the south, KHHSCHLR said. Furthermore, I strongly recommend that we request aid from Roland Gork. As many powerful warriors as we can get. We'll also need 5 times as many mystics as we have here. Have you gone insane? Even if we delivered that request, do you believe that they'd accommodate us? It is not a request made lightly. All understand that the undead are enemies of life itself. If they consume the Draconic kingdom, Roland Gork will be next. It is better to stand strong together while we can. KHHSCHLR stared up at him for a good, long while, her expression a mix of incredulity and annoyance. Let's not sound such an alarm until we're sure we know what we're facing, yes? She said after some time, carry out your tests and we will see what we require based on the results. A warrior does not strike to kill until he means to do so, Elin Renatha said. This is even more true for armies. The results that bring about our end will not be revealed until our enemies intend to put an end to us. We already understand that there is some greater will controlling these undead. They are not the mindless horde that you first dismissed them as. Thurgak's warning was not the first. Another young runner from Nakira had come in advance of her with news from the north. The reminder, however, only seemed to sour KHHSCHLR's mood. Her ears flattened and she turned away. We can't function like this. Effectively dismissed, Elin Renatha left the human clan hold. 2 other clan lords detached themselves from a nearby building and fell into step with him. So, Elin Ver, a Lup Lord, said, what's it going to be? We need to grind down the numbers of the undead. Ranged skirmishing if at all possible. Some of the undead in that horde have very annoying abilities that are delivered through direct contact. We're also going to need to increase the ratio of mystics in each warband to deal with all of the debilitating effects. That's not something we can easily do, Elin Kim, the other clan lord, shook his mane. We can't just move mystics around from tribe to tribe. We'll have to sort out the warriors, too. What? I don't speak of this lightly, Elin Renatha said. Some of the undead have supernatural defenses like magical beasts and monsters. We're going to have to make specialized warbands to deal with them, and each member of that warband must be capable of defeating such opponents. Do you have any idea how long that will take? Elingver whined, his once wagging tail hanging limp. If it needs to be done, Elin Renatha said, it needs to be done. Not doing anything is the same as helping our enemies. Is this KHHSCHLR's idea? Elin Kim asked. No, Elin Renatha flicked his ear in annoyance. She would have us carry on as we have. But going by Thurgak Nakira's words, we can't do that. I was hoping you'd say it was the sage's idea so we could just ignore it. That's not the end of it, Elin Renatha said. We need to send runners to recall the lords in the south, and we need to ask Roland Gork for help. There are dozens of undead beings as strong as Goro Nakira to contend with. The 2 clan lords stopped in their tracks. Dozens? They said. I'll send the runners myself, Elin Renatha told them. The sage was also against this, by the way, but this is our war to fight. I'll be damned if I let her ruin everything. Good evening, Lord Tian. And a good evening to you, Lady Zaradnik, the Sorcerer King's royal butler replied with a dignified nod. You've come to see Her Majesty, I assume? Yes, if she will see me. I've come to deliver the initial reports from the south. Lady Delarose, who stood opposite the door to Lord Tian, slipped into the suite behind them. When she didn't immediately appear again, Ludmilla looked up at Lord Tian. I hope your duties have not tired you overly much, Lord Tian. On the contrary, Lord Tian replied, duties performed in His Majesty's service can never be considered a tiresome thing. Of course. Her mind drifted back to the excursion with the Sorcerer King to the Katsa Plains. While Lady Shiltir and the rest of the vassals who had descended with him expressed the same, unwaveringly dutiful attitude as Lord Tian, Ludmilla sometimes wondered if that was truly what His Majesty desired. At the least, he considered Lady Shiltir and her cousins as something precious to care for, not servants through which his every desire might be fulfilled. The individuals in question, however, didn't see things that way. Speaking of your duties, Ludmilla said, I believe it prudent to raise the potential threat presented to the Queen and her entourage by 1 degree. Oh? What prompted this? There's a distinct difference in the level of organization and martial power between the beastmen we've been chasing for the last few weeks and those we face in the east. We've given them no indication of the Draconic Kingdom's connection to the undead horde, but that doesn't stop their stealthier individuals from potentially sneaking past our lines and appearing anywhere in the country. I see. How stealthy do you believe these individuals to be? Realistically, a bit more than I am. I know it's nothing to you, but the core of Her Majesty's government is also traveling with her. Losing any number of them would be a devastating loss for the Draconic Kingdom and will cast doubts upon whether a personal servant of His Majesty can ensure the Queen's safety. Understood. I'll see what I can do about security arrangements. Steps approached the door from deeper within the suite. Ludmilla and Lord Tian cut their conversation short. Lady Delarose reappeared and motioned for Ludmilla to enter. Her Majesty will see you now. Lady Delarose led her into the suite's inner chambers, where Queen Auriculus was submerged up to her shoulders in a bath of steaming water. Lady Sorrel was attending to the Queen, who opened her dark eyes and looked over at their approach. My most sincere apologies for interrupting your bath, Your Majesty. Ludmilla lowered herself into a deep curtsy. It's fine, Queen Auriculus replied. You are not the type to bother us needlessly, I hope. Ludmilla rose again with a slight smile on her lips. Queen Auriculus always seemed to have an easy way about her that somehow still commanded the respect of those she interacted with. I dropped in on General Saul Karnian while looking around the southern provinces. The Queen shifted to sit higher in her bath. Saul Karnian is alive? She leaned against the edge of the bathtub toward Ludmilla. Does that mean Fortune Pass still stands? What about Fortune Bay? The general abandoned Fortune Pass to fight in the mountains, Ludmilla replied. Going by what we saw of the other fortresses and the general's results, it was the correct decision. He and his people are still effectively resisting the beastmen. Fortune Bay is still under your citizens' control and the situation is favorable enough that your citizens are raiding the beastmen instead of the other way around. That's wonderful news. Lady Sorrel smiled. Queen Auriculus nodded. That is far beyond what we dared hope for, though the southern provinces have always had better luck with the beastmen in the riverlands. General Saul Karnian's successful resistance presents new strategic options, Ludmilla said. He and I are of the mind that the Oracle on Reach should be prioritized and the Sorceress Kingdom's general staff agrees. With the rainy season on its way, all fighting in the southern provinces will be significantly subdued, if not entirely paralyzed. Since we now know that the people there are safely hidden away, we can focus on those in captivity. We can hardly turn down the advice if everyone agrees upon it. You have our approval. Thank you, Your Majesty. There is one other thing to address. Ludmilla reached into her infinite haversack, withdrawing the collection of adventurer tags. She stepped up and placed them on a stool beside the bath. Queen Auriculus frowned at the pile of metal before reaching out to take the adamantite tag. She leaned back in her bath again, dangling it in front of her face. Leave us, she said quietly. Zaradnik, attend. Lady Sorrel and Lady Delarose hesitated for a moment, glancing at Ludmilla before leaving the suite. A heartbeat after the door clicked shut, Queen Auriculus threw the tag over her shoulder. I hated that man, she muttered. Ludmilla blinked at the lack of pluralis majestatis. The Queen held a sour look on her face as she sat in silence. Several seconds passed before she rose from her bath with a sigh to retrieve the adamantite tag. She returned to the water and stared at the thing glumly. No, I don't actually hate any one person, she said. Not even the beastmen invading my domain. As the Black-Scaled Dragon Lord, I cannot. This probably sounds strange for a sovereign, but do you know how annoying it is to rely on people that disgust you? Nobles often find themselves in the same predicament, Your Majesty. I dispense with the formalities, Queen Auriculus told her. I've heard Your Majesty and all the other variations about 300,000 times in the last few days. One would think they'd get used to it if it happened that often. In most other situations, perhaps, but it pains me to hear it right now. I don't feel like a majestic anything with all that's happened recently. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. She raised the chain in her hand, reaching for a glass of wine with the other. I hate adventurers, you know? I consider them to be just as bad as workers, if not worse. The very idea of adventurers disgusts me. Do you know why? Ludmilla shook her head. Queen Auriculus took a sip from her glass. It's because humans rely on one another to survive, the Queen said. Human civilization is built when communities join hands to create something greater than themselves. Adventurers, workers and others like them, however, turn their backs on that. They are those who are fortunate enough to be born with great power and talent, and have had the luck or resources to cultivate their personal strength. The fact that they owe their very existence and everything that profits them to the efforts of the countless millions that came before somehow doesn't register in their minds. Never mind the past, they have no thought for the future, they only live in the present for short-lived, selfish ends. It is especially ridiculous in the Draconic kingdom. One survives because their neighbor just happened to be the one who was eaten, yet there are those who manage to conclude that they simply deserved to survive, just as they deserve to pursue their selfish ends. Queen Auriculus placed the tag back onto the pile. The slain theocracy believed that the adventurer system would work to their benefit, but they never imagined the harm that it would cause. What do you mean by that? Ludmilla asked. You know that the Adventurer Guild was an institution founded by the theocracy, yes? Yes, it was a stopgap measure for local security established in the wake of the demon gods. On the surface, it was, and it was for that reason everyone adopted it in those fearful times. In reality, it was a seed of selfishness planted in every human nation that rose in the wake of the calamity 2 centuries ago. The theocracy believed that, as the preeminent power in the region, they would naturally attract all of the greatest individuals that appeared and would be able to position them as they pleased. Water dripped into the steaming bathtub as Queen Auriculus raised a glistening finger. The Adventurer Guild does not involve itself in the conflicts of humankind. I'm sure you've heard that before. I'm sure everyone familiar with the Adventurer Guild is familiar with that policy, Ludmilla replied with a nod. They go out of their way to state it all the time, after all. It's a policy that both encourages its members to stay detached from local interests, Queen Auriculus said, and prevents strong adventurers from threatening the lives of other strong adventurers. The system of rank, reward and fame is both a trap and a filter, separating the wheat from the chaff. And it is the slain theocracy that harvests the fruit of that process. Unfortunately, it also has the effect of crippling a country's national power. Perhaps they understood that and did it on purpose anyway, to ensure that the human nations around them remained dependent on their care. If the Adventurer Guild didn't exist, Ludmilla said, and workers as a result, you would still have mercenaries. Of course, the Queen replied, but mercenaries are unwieldy and problematic. They come with baggage. Anyway, I digress. What I mean to say is I would prefer that the fruit cultivated in my domain benefits my domain. I want my people to understand that they are part of a greater legacy rather than believe that they somehow sprung forth independently from nothingness. That to be gifted with rare ability is not considered power to be exploited for personal privilege, but a precious opportunity upon which the very future of their civilization rests. So you wish for me to encourage a value system that promotes the thinking that is conducive to the greater good of society. It is to your benefit as well. It is also to the benefit of your country. The greatest challenge of any state is ensuring that its resources are efficiently employed. People are the sort of resource with minds of their own and legs that can carry them off to places unknown. I do not mean it in the cold sense that the Empire does, of course, that's just the reality of things. The tribal systems of humanity evolved in a way that attempted to address that tendency. Those with desirable talent and ability were offered incentives for their service. Traditionally, it meant offering land, rights and privileges, in short, a noble title. Well-bred daughters were also used as a weapon in that struggle. As time passed and civilization advanced, however, Freedom, prosperity, and what was desirable were no longer solely defined by having those things. Your people appear fanatically loyal as it is, Ludmilla noted. In a manner of speaking, Queen Auriculus replied. They are loyal insofar as what they are dictates what loyalty is. What loyalty means to a landlord or tenant is very different from what it means to a merchant or mercenary. I suppose that is difficult to notice from your position. I will keep your wishes in mind, Drow. Ludmilla's mouth clamped shut. Her upbringing wouldn't allow her to address Queen Auriculus by her first name alone. The queen rolled her eyes with a smile, her voice turning coy. Drow, eh? I hadn't realized you wanted to get that close. By the way, how did you get these tags? Did Saukanian take the beastmen who had them down with his army? No, Ludmilla replied, I just happened to land on them earlier today. Really? Really? It was nothing special.